In this video, we're going to be discussing the 2 to 3 player variant of Treasuarrrr known as Treasuarrrr Duel, as well as showing you how to make your own decks to keep the game a bit more fresh. Treasuarrrr Duel is mostly very similar to regular Treasuarrrr. However, in order to facilitate a board that gets a bit more cluttered and to avoid players being able to perpetually run away from each other, 2 segments of the board are cut off by this here. This acts a little bit like a tentacle, but it is not a tentacle. If you end your turn next to it, you are not going to be pushed, you're not going to trigger a Kraken phase. The way that it does act like a tentacle is if a tentacle grows into the tavern in duel mode, it will immediately flood the board instead of waiting for a second tentacle, flooding the smaller segment cut off by this barricade here. The other major difference with this game mode is how the artifacts are set up. There's only 4 artifacts in the game, meaning that you're never going to be able to win the game with just 1 score. Additionally, players are going to have to agree on which artifacts are involved. In a 2-player game, this is nice and easy. Players can just decide 2 artifacts each and place them on the board in reasonable locations, potentially moving this barricade if it helps to put things into the right place. Although I do find that when you do want to do a swap, making sure you just put this back in the slot here sort of shows you where the badger artifact is supposed to be spawning. It's supposed to spawn on the cult space. In a 3-player game, it can be a little more difficult because one player is going to at least one player is going to end up not getting all the artifacts they want. In that situation, usually you'll have each player select just 1 artifact and randomly generate the last one. However, you can do this however you like, really, if you want to try and be more fair to everyone at the table. The only other difference in the game, and I'm not going to be able to demonstrate this right now because I don't have a card available, is some cards have a duel icon on them, which is represented by a pair of crossed swords. This affects the rules of that card. That card's text is changed in a 2 to 3 player game, usually because the card would be too powerful in a 2 or 3 player game. It's based around maybe doing a lot of damage to a random enemy, or some other kind of effect that is too powerful when there's only one opponent to deal with. I'm now going to open up the deck building side of the game and we can discuss this. Although, I think actually before we do that, I will quickly show you a card with a duel icon. Duel icon you can see on its second ability there. So, when you want to build a deck in Treasuarrrr, and you're done with the faction games, and in a faction game you'll simply take all the cards in one faction and use that as your deck. But there are several ways that you can consider building your own decks to have a slightly more interesting experience. The way that Treasuarrrr is really designed to be played is with something called the bin draft. Every card in Treasuarrrr is assigned to one of these bins. Each bin contains exactly 10 cards. In a bin draft, players will snake draft all of the bins until they have 4 bins each. So if you imagine a 3-player draft, you may have player 1 take a bin of their choice, player 2 would take 1, and then player 3 would take 1, and then you would go back in the opposite direction. So player 3 would get another opportunity to take 1, then player 2, then player 1, and this just continues until every player has taken 4 bins. Those bins will make up their decks. Playing like this introduces these factions here, also these cards here, which are of no faction. They are neutral cards. Neutral cards do not require a card of a particular faction in a stack to play, but they also do not provide any identity to that stack unless they state otherwise. So they're quite flexible to play, but they're a little bit weaker to put into stacks. Using the bin draft, there should be plenty of opportunities to build unique decks. There are over 6,000 possible combinations, and so for the majority of players, particularly people who want to play Treasuarrrr as an out-of-the-box board game, this is really the advised mechanism. If you are looking to play Treasuarrrr more as a card game, which is something that we do expect people to want to do, there is also a constructed mode. However, Treasuarrrr is really not designed to function like many other trading card games, where you want to build your decks to be as consistent as possible. Effects in Treasuarrrr are often designed to be very lopsided. Bins are often designed to have some cards that are very powerful and some cards that are quite weak to counteract that. and trying to adjust that into a constructed format doesn't normally end well. The constructed format that we are currently decided on, although this may well change, is that you select 8 bins for yourself. This is all done by yourself, so there's no need to worry about other people drafting out bins you might have wanted. You can also draft 2 copies of the same bin. For some reason, I cannot get this to show up here. So let's say that I'm going to build an extremely bad deck here. Picking 8 bins essentially at random. And then to actually build your deck, you will cut 40 cards from this selection. So your total deck size will be 40 in the same way as it would be in a draft game. You may have noticed that faction games involve slightly smaller decks. It's not really a problem for the game, because when you do finish drawing your deck in Treasuarrrr, you simply shuffle your discard pile back into your deck and keep going. You don't lose when your deck runs out. Alternatively, for those who are very familiar with trading card games... Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Treasuarrrr can be drafted in more traditional manners. In this case, what you want to do is simply take all of the cards and group them up, and use this to generate whatever drafting method you choose. 15 card packs being drafted works pretty well for this game, although you do typically want to be using 4 packs, because the 40 card decks can be a little restrictive if you don't. You don't want to force people to be playing too many factions as a rule. However, you can use pretty much any drafting method you like. There are several known by the card game community, and if you are interested in this, I advise looking into MTG Cube, the Reddit. They're very, very good for this. As a rule, I would advise, if you are going to try and draft Treasuarrrr in a more complicated manner like this, each player should have 60 cards in their final pool to build a 40-card deck from, or else the power level is just going to be extremely low, and it's going to be impossible to play any kind of strategy that doesn't involve building up very large stacks so that they have all the factions in them. That actually covers the last in the series of videos with regards to the real rules of the game. I do plan to make another video that explains how to play well, to explain sort of strategy, how you want to build your decks to function, how you want to be building your stacks to function, and other few gameplay tips, but that will probably come at a later date. Thank you for watching these videos.